How's everybody doing this morning?
Doing well.
Doing well. Okay. Well, definitely thank you all for taking the time to have this conversation. I want you guys just to give a brief introduction of some of your background in regards to counseling and the population that you work with. And we will start with Kiki.
Hi, I'm Kiki Rashawn. I'm a graduate intern at Texas A&M University, San Antonio, and right now I'm doing my practicum at Usawa Wellness Service Center. And I want to specialize in marriage and family counseling, specifically with blended families and divorce.
I'm next. I'm Liz Woodruff. I'm a LPC associate. I've been with Usawa for almost 2 years. I think it'll be 2 years this upcoming fall. And I work primarily with, definitely with BIPOC community for sure, primarily with adult women. I do enjoy working with couples as well. So I do have a few couples that I work with, and just primarily focusing on, anxiety, depression, cultural issues for sure are present in our sessions. So something I'm definitely passionate about.
We also have Miss Jonacy Alexander, who is going to touch in during the discussion. So let's go ahead and jump in, ladies.
Okay.
So my first question, I guess, for you all is, how can individuals from different racial and ethnic backgrounds cultivate understanding and empathy within these interpersonal relationships? I think that's one of the biggest things that we tend to focus on when we talk about within our community and relationships. So how do you think they can cultivate understanding and empathy?
Well, I think that if they would show understanding and empathy by just being a voice for us and being compassionate and listening to what we're actually saying. Because I find that most relationships, even me being military, I was sometimes only African American in my classroom, and they would say things sometimes that were insensitive, and I would tell my friends, why would they say stuff like that? It's like they didn't see me as being a person of color. I was just a military kid to them. So I think a basic understanding and sensitivity when you're dealing with in interpersonal relationships, no matter if it's school or if it's in your personal life as well. So just that basic empathy and understanding and sensitivity.
I agree with Kiki. I think for me, I think listening is the biggest component. Listening, but also asking questions. So recognizing your own prejudice, have some self-awareness and call it out. Ask questions. If you don't know something, instead of leading with judgment or criticism, lead with curiosity and ask, well, why do you do this? Or, if it is a cultural, some confusion with the culture, or, why, I don't know, someone from the BIPOC community eats a certain food or dresses a certain way, ask a question. Get involved and don't be so timid, but be more open to experience.
Mm-hmm. And hi, I'm a bit behind. I had technical difficulties, so I apologize to everyone out there. I'm Jonacy Alexander. I'm a licensed master of social work with USAWA. I've been with USAWA almost a year. I'm getting close. And I, like Liz, work primarily with the BIPOC community, whether it be in couples, friendships, relationships. And I 100% agree with what you both said. Ask questions, get involved, but also instead of just asking questions of those that you have interpersonal relationships with, whether coworkers or friends that are in the BIPOC community, do your own research. That starts to cultivate your own understanding. There's a lot out there. So read the new Jim Crow, read the 1619 Project, start deep diving into some of those other cultural literature that's out there. And then that's also showing your friends that you value them and you value their culture to take the time to learn about it.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. Thank you, ladies. I think, Liz, you definitely bring up a good point in regards to asking questions with curiosity versus judgment, because there is we can sense when there's judgment in conversation and questioning. So I do think that is a very valid point. I guess that will lead me into what are some common challenges that you see or yourself face within the BIPOC community in interpersonal relationships?
Mm. That is a good question. I think I've had this conversation with others, and I've asked them that question in different ways. And what comes up a lot is financial prejudice, assuming that people of color are not do not have the same, a level of how can I say it? Just finances in general, just finances, like, oh, you can't afford that, or is this too much for you? Like, if you're within conversation with people, and it's the microaggressions, I guess, that kind of show up where it's an assumption of sorts. And in a lot of conversations, like I said, the ability to show up, like, I have the right to sit at the table just as well as you. And so I think that those are definitely challenges that pop up quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with Liz says too. For me, it's always, oh, I didn't know Black people do that, or I didn't know Black people do this, especially swimming. My mom made sure all of us had swim lessons, and that was the one thing. Black people don't know how to swim. I'm like, yes, we do. And if we don't know how to swim, it's because historically we didn't have access to these resources to be able to do that. So it's always a stereotype for me. Oh, you like rock music? Oh, really? Wow, you like that kind of thing. It was always for me.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. There's a lot of invalidation that occurs, I think, with people of color, especially in terms of like the workplace. You get a promotion. Oh, well, how did you? What school did you go to? Oh, I didn't know you had that in your background. Instead of just asking the question that you really want to know, are you sure you're smart enough to do that? Because I don't like social workers. Or invalidation that I hear as far as not even assuming that you are the social worker, or you are the therapist. So assuming that you're at the courthouse because you have a trial coming up and you're not the lawyer, or assuming that you're lost and you're not the professor. You must be a student here. You can't possibly be the professor appearing and showing that. So I think those are common challenges that a lot of people of color face within workplace specifically, and not really being allowed to just exist.
So with these challenges, and definitely what I'm hearing you guys speak of is a lot of the implicit biases that are there within just society in general. How do you feel, or how do you see it affect the mental health of the BIPOC community?
I feel like we have to try harder. We always have to prove ourselves that we belong there. That's the biggest challenge. And if you went to this school, oh, they automatically assume it must have been affirmative action, that we got there because of quotas, and the school has to meet their intake population to have so many Black people there. That's the thing that really stands out to me, that we always have to prove ourselves that we belong there and that we're worthy and we're smart enough, like John C. Mentioned early.
Like you're not. I think that does show as anxiety, because now you feel inside that there is if I don't show up as my best self, if I'm not better than everyone else, then I'm failure worthy.
Yeah.
A lot of imposter syndrome shows up in that, because you might feel that you are good enough, capable enough, or like so you kind of both left look like a million different things, substance misuse.
I definitely agree too. I mean, that especially with the imposter syndrome. So it's always, on high alert. Am I doing this right? Am I saying this correctly? Am I it affects, to be honest, it affects connection with others. It affects the closeness that with your in your interpersonal relationships, because you have to Kiki's point, you have to prove something, prove that you belong, prove that you have the education, prove that you have a place there. And so mentally, from a mental health standpoint, anxiety increases. I would even go as far as say depression can kick in, because you're working so hard to be someone that is acceptable to everyone else. When you go home, who are you? You know, and having those questions can take a toll for sure.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to sometimes, I mean, it can even get to the level of trauma, correct? You know, so depending on the different circumstances or experiences one may have, it could lead to your mental health being affected with a traumatic experience. I think in the simplest term, you know, we can't really say what is traumatic for someone is going to be traumatic for the other person. So from an individual standpoint, trauma being something that basically overwhelms the system and impacts functioning, right? That can be microaggressions, that can be imposter syndrome, that can be working to meet the expectations of someone who does not even respect you, you know. So it's definitely things to take into consideration when we are in these interpersonal relationships with the BIPOC community. So I definitely do agree with everyone on that. I guess, what do you think can be done? So from a professional standpoint, what do you think can be done to mitigate the biases that the BIPOC community experiences? What can employers do or schools do?
I mean, I think what we're doing right now, let's talk, you know, let's have more conversation. Let's bring in more people, more ideas, more culture into the conversation and get some real, you know, real topics on the table. And let's not avoid the discomfort, because that's really what it is. It's uncomfortable for people who are not part of BIPOC population to have these conversations. So let's include them. Let's make them, let's invite them into the conversation, and let's get uncomfortable together.
Yeah. And by creating a safe space to be able to have these conversations.
Continuing the conversations is so important, and being able to have that, like Kiki said, in a safe space where people feel like they could be honest and they can learn from one another and grow, and not a forced space. So often we see it from the top down, and it starts to look performative. So it looks like we're all gonna all put black squares because we stand by diversity, equity, inclusion, and say all the right things. But when you look down the rest of it, when you look at maybe your teachers, or you're looking at your mid-level managers, they feel like this is forced on them, and so they're not actively engaged in those conversations, or they're not actively engaged in the training because they don't want to be there, they don't want to do it, and they know that at the top you don't care about doing it either.
Yeah.
I have a question. Let me ask you guys this. How do you see the experiences of BIPOC communities show up within the work that you do? I think all of you work with systems as far as couples or families. And I know that, well, I believe there's a different approach to working with the BIPOC community and relationships. So how do you guys think that what we experience from society impacts how we show up in our own relationships?
Well, for me, I make sure I'm very sensitive to what my clients are saying, and I make sure I'm thinking about all aspects. If I have someone from a different ethnicity from myself, I make sure I learn their culture. I make sure I'm very well versed in how they perceive things as far as the people, and especially with mental health. I'm aware of all the prejudice, especially with marriage and family. I want to do that, and I know most of it is stemmed from most BIPOC populations not having resources to counseling and the stigma attached to it. So if we can break that down, and then also share that I've also had counseling service, being authentic and being transparent with your clients about how you feel about mental health. and what brought me to this profession. I shared that with them when they asked me that.
I think that's good. Yeah, definitely sharing what led you to the profession.
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Leslie, I agree. I feel like there is a different type of approach almost.
Yes.
And being, to Kiki's point, being culturally sensitive, I go back to asking questions. So if you're from a different culture than I am, let me ask a question out of curiosity to get to know you better, to allow that safe space for you to share with me and educate me on your culture. So going into, I mean, the field of mental health is so widespread. No one is exempt. All cultures are experience some sort of mental health. And so just asking those questions, being comfortable within, knowing where you stand too. So to Kiki's point, like knowing your own biases, knowing your own things that show up for you in session, that may not sit well with you, your own discomfort, and being able to talk about that with a supervisor or with another colleague too, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And to Liz's point about, asking questions about that couple or that client culture, because I'm not the expert on your life, you are. The same thing applies to relationships and families. So being able to share with that other person in that relationship or that other member in your family, this is my background, this is where I'm coming from, and this is the culture that I grew up in, keeping in mind that culture is not race specific, but also gender specific. It's the community that you grew up in. And so really sharing that with me as your therapist, but more importantly, sharing it with who's in your family and who's in that relationship or partnership with you, because how your culture showed you one thing might be the lens you're viewing that family system or that relationship. That might be the lens you're viewing it through. So if your community, your culture tells you, albeit wrong, one common thing in the Black culture is men don't cry, right? Men don't cry. Coming up, you're a man, quote unquote. Don't agree with that. But if you're coming from that culture and that thought process, and you're coming into a relationship where that male partner, given this is a cisgender heterosexual partnership, that male partner is crying and they're expressing their emotions. Now we have a couple that's having a hard time navigating because my culture told me men don't cry. Having constant arguments and we're having a lot of concern. You need to navigate and share where that's coming from. Why do you think that when you peel it back, sometimes that might be the community and culture you're raised in?
Totally. So I definitely think as we're talking, like Liz said, like it's a different approach that one must respect when working with members of the BIPOC community. Because I do think we have such a complexity that we bring to the room that if you're not, culturally competent, then you're going to miss out or misdiagnose. So when we talk about misdiagnosing, how do you ladies feel about the act of diagnosing within the BIPOC community? How do you use diagnoses within the room? Because it can look different for us.
Well, personally, since it's new to my journey, I'm also aware about the stigma of a diagnosis. So I'm very careful when I'm diagnosing to make sure I'm not putting a specific, people worry about stigmas. Oh, that's going to be in my record. So I try not to focus so much on the diagnosis and just treat the symptoms. Work on treating the symptoms instead of working about the diagnosis. Because that's what most people of color, even myself, I've had counseling before in previous years. I was always afraid, what if someone find out I have anxiety? That's going to look bad on me. So I'm very mindful of that when I diagnose by what I put down and what conversations I have with my clientele to make sure they understand that and how they feel about it as well.
Yeah, I agree, Kiki. I try to be very mindful about how I diagnose for those reasons as well. For the stigma, for sometimes the overdiagnosing, where kids or males, you get diagnosed with one thing which normally looks not like behavior or those types of diagnoses, when really it might be ADHD in that child, and it's not because it's poor behavior or because their parents aren't raising them correctly. And then in women, we might not get, in Black women specifically, something I recently learned over the last few months is our irritation, our frustration is typically a symptom of anxiety. We're irritated quickly because of anxiety, not because you're angry or you're mean.
Right.
You're anxious.
Yeah.
And so that's something that might not ever go diagnosed. So you're just thinking, you're going through life thinking you're just, oh, she's just mean. She just has RBF.
That's very powerful what you're saying, because that's true. When you said that, I can feel myself in that moment when I've done that. And you're right, it was coming from my anxiety when I was irritable. I was anxious. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think
we don't get to show up this way.
No, not at all. Well, I agree with both of you. And then in the sense of being knowledgeable again about your own biases. And so when you do have a male client that presents, or maybe he isolates himself, maybe he's not as emotionally connected within himself. And so it's like, oh, well, he's typical man. No, maybe he's depressed, right? Maybe he does not know, maybe he never had the fundamentals on what that even looks like to connect with your own emotions. And so I think there's a lot of over-diagnosing and under-diagnosing that happens within the BIPOC community, and is labeled, to your point, Jonathan, that, you know, Black women have this irritation. Oh, she has anger issues. Does she though? Like, it's like, no, she doesn't. She's anxious and doesn't know what to do with that anxiety. And so it does come off as her being more irritable. And so being mindful and taking it with a very fine-tooth comb when we do put diagnosis on, or put diagnosis on a chart for a client, that we are very mindful on the cultural factors for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Especially since you mentioned over-diagnosing. One of the things we saw, like in my grad school, was being aware of the overdiagnosing for delusions or delusional disorder when that person's culture says that they speak to their ancestors. That's how they communicate. They get through grief, or that's how they process maybe the spiritual realm. And depending on the clinician that you bring that to say after grief, I talk to birds because that's my ancestors, they're gonna, oh, let me hand out this delusional disorder.
Right.
Right.
That sounds, you're cleaning up continuously right after grief. I'm not even taking that into a picture of maybe that's your community or that's your culture. I'm going to give you this OCD diagnosis just based off of the pure just 1, 2, 3 that you're telling me, and not taking in the culture or the sense of community that you feel doing this at this time.
Very good points. I think that we as a profession have to continue to monitor the over-diagnosing, but as Liz said, also the under-diagnosing, especially when it comes to not taking our symptoms seriously, and we see in this from like our perinatal discussion, just all the way to physical and mental symptoms that we do have. So very, very good points. And I guess that leads me to when we talk about racism, like systemic racism, how do you think that impacts the BIPOC community in regards to interpersonal relationships, the systemic aspect of racism that we experience? So when we think about redlining, or when we think about the stress that comes within our rooms, when we hear the stories, it goes, most of the times than not, it goes to systemic issues that plague us and we experience within the work environment and school environment.
I think we all took a second because there's impacts everything.
There's so much. I was trying to process which one I want to discuss.
Like he was saying earlier about being a part of the military community, but also still feeling alone. I
Mm.
can't have friends because you don't understand what I'm going through. And so
Mm.
where is my support with my mental health? Because my friends are looking at me like, well, what's wrong with you? To as far as systemic issues on a larger like government standpoint, you look at family housing or getting on some type of assistance, right? That
Mhm.
required, especially in the beginning, for um, Black and Latino families specifically, to not be together. Like you can't have that male in the home, and you can't have
Yeah.
the mom in the home, and still get on that assistance that they might need.
Mhm.
Right? You look at it from a stand of the indigenous populations and what that did, as far as maybe being on the same land, but your kid has to go to school over here. And so now we don't have that family dynamic anymore because you're over here and I'm over here. And so that's impacting families, it's impacting couples, it's impacting friendships. So I think there's a lot of different ways that systemic racism impacts interpersonal relationships.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
There's
Absolutely.
there's so many flaws in the design in itself. Like Jonathan, like breaking up families in itself is, it almost seems, and I don't even want to call it that. I mean, I'll call it that. It's designed to break up families, right? It's designed to keep families on low income. It's designed to, we don't want you, we want you to go far, but not too far, right? So women and men who are on government assistance, it's like, we want you to work, but you can only make minimum wage. Otherwise, we're cutting your benefits. We're going to give you a little, but we're going to keep you here. And so, I mean, the opportunities are so limited for the youth because they have to stay in homes that don't cost as much. They have to work, moms and dads have to work jobs that they can't get paid as much because of the assistance. Or if they do get the jobs to make more money, it's still a family that they have to support. And so they're still lower income population that cannot provide the same benefits as to their children as people in upper class, middle to upper class.
And even
And I want to add on to that. Also, they're also breaking down the foundation of getting married, of being married, because it doesn't make sense to get married because your whole income, your whole family dynamic is together. And if the man's in the house, automatically you don't qualify because he makes $10 more than you're supposed to. So now they have family people, they have units living together who want to get married, but they can't because it would be not cost efficient for them to get married.
that's a
And
great
That's a good point.
And I want to say for Liz, who was saying, even if you make it to upper class or that less than 10%, let's say you make it to BIPOC millionaire status,
right.
right? But you come from a family that's in a lower socioeconomic status. Now we've distanced ourselves because we're no longer technically in the same community. My issues and your
Yeah.
issues look
Yeah.
different. So now that family dynamic of maybe Sunday dinners or even the little bit of family time that we might have had before when we were all of the same social and economic status, I'm in a new community. And which comes with its own mental health struggles of feeling alone, that imposter syndrome we were talking about before, feeling like you're at the table, but maybe you have no sense of community there. So now, if you're in that status, who do you talk to?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think also, like, if we look at systemic racism within our work, maybe not your work, because your work environment is like amazing, but more, outside of our, and just some of the things that we hear our clients talk about, like Jonathan was pointing out earlier, this whole initiative with DEI and the flaws within that, and still the present microaggressions with the idea of even having to have DEI. What do you think that does to a client that's coming in? Because just for transparency, we do have a lot of working individuals coming in with stress related to work, and it's great that they have the services to seek, get the service. But if their stress is at work, how do we help them navigate through the racism that they experience as a BIPOC individual. Because we can't just say, "Oh, girl, just quit your job,"
right. That's a tough one. It's a tough one. And I think that it's definitely individualistic, right? So each client is different, but that is a very tough one. And it does show up in, I mean, I'm not sure if either one of you ladies have experience, but that shows up a lot with my clients, especially since I see working adults. And navigating that and trying to tell them like, oh, we should do some meditation. We should do some, that's great. However, if it's showing up every day, microaggressions with your boss, right? The person that gives you your paycheck and you're like, yes, sir, no, sir. You're doing all these shucking and jiving moves at work. Like what happens? You can meditate all you want and it's still every day, like clockwork. You're still being, you still got to do the dance. Mm-hmm. So it is a very challenging thing within sessions, within the room to navigate with clients, at least from my own experience, that it has been one of the bigger challenges. And what I do with clients, building self-confidence, building self-awareness, knowing your boundaries. I mean, boundaries is huge. That comes up in almost every single session. Knowing how to, if we're going to move forward, let's disarm the situation. Let's discern the situation. Is this a time to quit? Might be. It might be. Or is it a time, okay, let me get my ducks in a row so I can figure out how I can navigate this and still provide for my family and let me move accordingly. But it is one of the bigger challenges for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Liz, you're right. It might be the time to quit. It might be. I think the hardest thing about microaggressions is that micro part. It's that, am I crazy? Did you just?
So subtle. It's so subtle.
Right? So subtle. It's so subtle that you feel like you almost missed it.
Right. Like, wait a minute.
Yep. And so that might make a client feel like, well, I shouldn't quit because it's not a big deal. Maybe I
misinterpreted it.
Mm-hmm. I was wrong. Maybe they just meant that my locks are nice. And so they didn't mean like, oh, how do you wash that? They didn't really mean it in a negative way.
Right.
But that after time, I think in session, to your point, Leslie, and to Liz's point too, it's very individual on what that individual may have been through in the past or their own personal goals for themselves. But if that individual is showing up to me and it's visibly starting to cause them to suffer and not show up as their best self, then that's where I'm gonna ask the question of maybe what is it that you're benefiting from staying in this current position at this current location? And if it's this is where I need to stay right now because I need to make X amount between now and here, okay, well then that's the goal. We'll work on ways to cope through these microaggressions. But if it's, I don't know, I just think it's not a big deal, then we have something else that we might need to process.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I think some of it also comes to self-reflection, and messages are being repeated or nurtured that are messages that were heard, even before going into that work environment. Then that's also something that has to be addressed, because with the messaging, of course, we understand like that impacts how we see ourselves and how we navigate through other relationships. So if we're taking this stress home from work, how is that showing up with our partner? How is that showing up with our children? How is that showing up with our friends? All important things to kind of keep in mind when we talk about from a systemic level, just the impact of the inequalities and racism that BIPOC individuals do experience, is how it kind of just goes into every interpersonal relationship that they are a part of. I know, Kiki, you spoke of a safe space earlier. Do you guys have any strategies or any suggestions on ways to create or what a safe space would look like for someone from the BIPOC community in any type of environment? What do you think they need or we need to feel safe?
This may sound very simple, But when I look outside of Usawa, I see that safe space for here, the safe space for this population. I mean, I think we're doing that in Usawa when we have those stickers and those advertisements up. That makes the client feel welcome. So I think we do that here in Usawa. We do we recognize that, and we actually say that, we publicize that we're a safe space for that.
Inclusion, right? It's inclusion. I mean, that's the first thing that pops up for me. Connection, community, and inclusion. You know, making sure that I mean, it's very difficult to do subcultures and cultures, but we do it seamlessly, right? I mean, the way that the office is here, to your point, Kiki, I think that we cover a lot of people. You know, everyone is welcome and everyone is included, no matter what. And so, and allowing the community be more involved with different communities, I think is also helpful in creating safe space. So letting them know that we are here for them.
And creating groups that we do to actually target what they need. So that's what we're doing too here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in addition to how you create your safe space within your therapeutic environment, but also that person creating their safe space at work, create a safe space at home, create a safe space wherever you find your spiritual solace. So really finding, and that safe space can be a literal place, or it could be a person, it could be a activity, whatever it is that you get that sense of how Kiki, where you feel welcome, where you feel like you belong and you can say whatever it is that you need to say, and have somebody not look at you like, oh, that's crazy. Why would you say that? Nobody would ever think that about you. Have that place or person that you can feel welcome to. So in the case you do have a microaggression or an overt racism that occurs, you have somebody that you can turn to and say, did you hear that just now? Yes, I heard it. You are not crazy. They were crazy for some.
How do you think our allies can actively support and advocate for BIPOC individuals?
Standing up and saying that person was crazy when they said it.
Yes, not just having the bystander effect when you just say, "No, that was messed up," when you're alone, but not saying anything when it's actually taking place.
That's good. Yeah, standing up,
like active support,
something,
right?
Being part of the conversation, being uncomfortable. You know, being more getting out in the community. I go back to community, like getting out in the community that does not go into a community that does not belong to you. Right, that you're not naturally a part of. So trying new things and again being a part of the conversation.
And teaching your children, teaching them at a young age, education, right? Telling them about differences without judgment, teaching them those skills, having those conversations with your family members and your friends.
Right. I think although sometimes a controversial person of discussion, Charlemagne, who's a radio personality, said something a couple years ago that I think is a great way for allies to show up. He said his mom, being a teacher, used to tell him to read books that did not pertain to his life at all. So as a young little Black boy, he was reading Judy Blume books, God is me, Margaret King. He's reading these books that don't pertain to his life at all. And it's helping him educate him on a different perspective. So I think that's how allies can also show up. Read a book that has nothing to do with your lifestyle and your background. Read a book that you might disagree with. And just see another perspective and show up that way.
Yep.
What role do you guys think that self-reflection plays in regards to navigating and improving interpersonal relationships? The self-reflection is important. Right?
By being honest with yourself and acknowledging that you made a mistake. Like, man, maybe did I say that? Man, I really didn't mean that. Actually looking at what you say and what you did and being truthful and not just trying to say, oh, I didn't mean it that way, but saying, you know what, I said it, and just reflect on what you said and how it made the other person feel.
Without defense, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Really digging into what your biases are.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has them. And so navigating what your own, doing some time to self-reflect and
Mm-hmm.
learn what your biases are and how they might show up in the world, that can be helpful in reflection as well.
Mhm. I completely agree with both of you. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just knowing, even in going in sessions, especially since I work with couples. So naturally, I mean, I'm a heterosexual female, part of the BIPOC population. So when I have a couple come in that maybe a homosexual couple that is Caucasian,
Mm-hmm.
right? So knowing how I represent, how I show up, how I'm presented to them is so important. And being open to their experiences and being willing to check myself, to be honest. I mean, when something comes up, like I said earlier, like if I feel something come up in the session where I'm like, oh, that makes me very uncomfortable, talk to my supervisor or talk to another colleague and kind of like, oh, this is going on with me. Like what can I do? So seek out my own support system
Right.
and services if I need them.
So, okay, I know, Liz, you were speaking about boundaries earlier, and I think, given the work that you do and how you do it so well, what are some, and I want everybody to chime in on here, but like, how can BIPOC individuals assert their boundaries and address microaggressions or those insensitive behaviors within their interpersonal relationships? So, whatever environment they're in, how do we enforce or nurture or educate um, BIPOC individuals on asserting their boundaries?
I think
Yeah,
that's
that one comes up. Oh, I'm sorry, Kiki.
no. I'm just
That one
thinking. Go
does
ahead. Go
come
ahead.
up a lot. Like I said, boundaries come up in almost every session with so many different things,
Oh.
especially working with again, professional adults. There was something I read the other day in the Harvard Business Review on microaggressions, and the biggest thing that popped up is discernment. So discerning the situation, knowing, am I crazy? Did that come off? Like checking, like taking a pause, taking a beat to really dissect what has happened. Another thing is, knowing, did this make me feel uncomfortable? So when a boundary is violated, so educating a client on what boundaries are, because a lot of people, from a cultural perspective, boundaries are, that's a topic that needs to be addressed for sure. A lot of times children don't know what boundaries look like. They don't know what healthy boundaries are. There's a lot of adults who don't know what healthy boundaries are because they have been violated in the past. Mm-hmm. And so educating our clients on what the different types of boundaries are, what healthy boundaries look like, when you start to feel uncomfortable, let's discern the situation. Let's have some I statements thrown in there and be able to speak up for yourself without offending someone, because we naturally get defensive, right? So let's disarm the situation first. Let me address, well, hey, I felt like this when you mentioned something about my hair. How did you mean that? Get clarification, right? Like what did you mean by that? With curiosity, again, with curiosity, and not, what are you talking about? Not with the not with the extra sauce on it, but more of like, hey, you said this earlier. I felt a little uncomfortable. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Right.
So approaching that way, but for sure, educating our clients on boundaries, I think, is really important, just as a foundation to begin with.
I don't know that I have anything to add to what Liz, what Liz said.
Yeah, that's perfectly said, Liz. Exactly.
It's a difficult one, though. I feel like we deal, even as in a profession, like we deal with boundaries so much. Like it's definitely swirling around all the time.
But it's also being, like I said, being a part of the BIPOC population ourselves. You're always afraid to say something because you're always being labeled, oh, you're just being overly sensitive, or you're being an angry Black person. And so that's why I had to really be mindful, say, you know what, I'm not going to fall into that. I'm going to say what I got to say, but it's just a way to say it. But I just can no longer just sit back and just let it occur anymore. And that took me years to actually finally get to that point.
And you just might be too tired.
Right. Right. I'm just too, yeah, exactly.
if one person asked you at 8 and then somebody else gave you a different microaggression at 9, then you have to go to a meeting with the new microaggressions at 10.
You're like, I'm tired. They're not going to change. You think they're not going to change? I'm not bothered.
On top of what society is showing you, on top of what's going on in the news, on top of whatever work stress you already have in family, you just might be too tired to even address the microaggression that's occurring. So I think that's why what Liz said was so perfect about boundaries.
Yes.
And it might not be that you're addressing, just look, I don't have time for you today. Right. I cannot allow you in my space at this moment. I understand you have questions. I am not able to answer any of those questions.
And it's okay to say that. Give ourselves permission to do that.
That's right, Kiki. I think that's a really good point. Like, give yourself permission to do it. You know, give yourself permission to stand up for yourself, to advocate for yourself, to say these things for sure.
How do you think, I guess, organizations and institutions, right? When we talk about DEI, if you were to go into an organization for consultation on DEI, what suggestions would you give to them on creating a space that promotes diversity and inclusion?
To make sure they do it more than just offering a symbol. Like I think John C. said something about black squares. Here's the diversity. We're gonna celebrate Juneteenth. Here's a little part for here, a little dedication to it. But actually holding true to it, actually having celebrations about it, discussions about it, instead of just saying here the symbol is and then just walking away from it. That's what I think most schools are doing. I felt that that's how I felt. Okay, we're gonna celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. They show a little clip about Martin Luther King and keep going. But that's not education. That's just doing something to present that. But you're not really educating anyone about why he's important or what he did, his accomplishments.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, we didn't even touch on the topic of like what happened in Florida recently with not including slavery BIPOC population in conversation, you know. So I think with an organization, what we can contribute is the inclusive pieces of Black history. Doesn't have to be just in February, right? Let's talk about it. Let's have every month. Let's pick a month. Let's pick times. Let's immerse ourselves in different cultures, Indian culture, like obviously indigenous people. Like, let's learn different things and create safe space. Let's create more of a safe space with the inclusion.
And not just fluff.
Ideas.
Not just fluff.
Right.
Just, we did it, here it is, and we'll do it again next year at the same time. You know, that kind of thing.
Pressure. I mean, pressure, because clearly, well, I don't want to go off into what's going on in Florida, but clearly pressure is not being applied enough over there to, but being vocal, you know, being more of a voice and, you know, leaning in on that. More inclusion.
Sure. And I would also say if I'm going into an organization to talk about their diversity, their current inclusion, how are you being equitable, I'm asking who's at the table, who is at this leadership, top leadership, right? Who is making the decisions? Who's your chief financial officer? Who's your chief technology officer? And then, is that diverse? Is it diverse in race? Is it diverse in ethnicity? Is it diverse in gender? Is it diverse in background? Is everybody of the same race and gender and went to the same exact schools? Or are we looking at some type of multi-background situation at the leadership level? But then I'm also looking all the way from the top to the bottom. Did that chief financial officer, yes, you hired a Hispanic woman to be your chief financial officer, but everybody in middle management, they didn't want to stay to be around for senior management. They're not in positions of next tier management. You only have the one Hispanic woman. I'm looking at your whole entire organizational structure to see, are you really practicing what you're preaching, or are you just filling a quota? Because if you are filling a quota, people in your organization feel that, they know that, and they're not staying to continue working for that organization. And then, like Kiki and Liz were saying, you know, pick a month. And also, go out into your community. I think this is what Liz was saying earlier. Be in your community. Are you attending National Black Maternal Mental Health Week events in your community if you're a healthcare organization? Are you out participating in the Latino or the Hispanic technical IT tech conference if you're in the tech industry, right? Are you out in the community and doing those things where they know this is not performative? They're, XYZ organization, they're always at our events. They're always supporting our fundraisers. They're at our back to school events, things like that. I think that is one thing, not one of many things that Usala does really well. Leslie is very, very mindful of being out in the community, supporting the communities that we say we support. We're out there doing the work as well. So it's all of it combined.
I think it, like you were saying, John, the performative piece, I want organizations and companies to understand that, like, it's hurtful, and we see it, and DEI is more than just like a luncheon every month, like, Cinco de Mayo. Okay, we've checked that box. Or, Juneteenth. Okay, we've checked that. It has to be more. It has to be evolving. It has to be inclusive, and it has to be intentional. I think anything, that's what I hear everyone saying, that we all can continue to drive with those 4 things, right? I guess my last question would be for you ladies is, knowing everything that the BIPOC community experiences on the outside, what are some tips that you can give individuals within the community to, I guess, request support from their support system instead of maybe like shutting down or not not saying not wanting to talk about it, but not bringing it into other relationships?
I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Leslie, when you said about self-reflection, actually knowing what you bring into what you're doing, what you purposely doing, what your intent is, to be honest about that. And that takes a lot, to be actually honest with yourself and say, okay, what do I bring to the table, or what I need to work on.
And that might look like therapy. I know therapy. It might look like therapy, and therapy might look different for you. That might be individual therapy, that might be family therapy, that might be going to group therapy, which we have group therapy sessions that go on. You attend for 6 weeks. That might be the catalyst you need to do the self-reflection Kiki's mentioning, to say, oh, this is what helps me when I feel microaggressions. This is what helps me show up better in my different relationships.
I agree with both of you too. And I think what pops up for me is to explore yourself, explore different podcasts, explore different movies, explore different books. To your point earlier, listen more to throw on NPR, right? Throw on something that's going to immerse you in different information that's different than your own, that you're getting from your own community. And that definitely self-awareness. I feel like that self-reflection has to happen often, for sure.
Definitely podcasts, to Liz's point. There's podcasts that I love and thoroughly enjoy, give me pause for reflection.
There's some on microaggressions. You can type anything. There's a podcast on everything.
Yes, you can. Just about anything.
Right. Some of my favorites are The Joy of Social Work. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she goes from everything from grief to relationships to Black women and dating. So it's very expansive, and she gets very personal and very real. And sometimes you can hear yourself in something that somebody else says. The Melanated Social Work is a group of men of color. So it's, I think, I want to say there's 4 or 5 of them. They're all licensed clinicians, and They go through a range of topics as well. And then, of course, therapy for Black girls, which
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I like that one, yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Liz, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
I was going through my head like which ones I routinely listen to, and Black marriage therapy is one of them that's like on my top list that I have recommended to clients who are not Black. You know, to, check this podcast out. I like Jay Shetty. He incorporates so many different populations on his podcast. I also listen to We Can Do Hard Things, Glennon Doyle. So and she's white homosexual woman, you know, and so I like to listen to all of the above, you know, and I think it's important to hear from different white men. Armchair expert, like I like him, Dak Shepard. He does that one, so he's funny, but he also brings in different people on his podcast too to just have open discussion. Just have open discussion about it. I think it's, you know, again, emerging yourself and listening, just listening.
You have any, Kiki?
No, I agree with all my colleagues, and like I said, self-reflection. That's the biggest thing, and most people, that's a hard thing to do, to look at yourself in the mirror, just actually evaluate who you are and what you believe in.
Well, we'll end on that note. I definitely thank you, ladies, for taking the time today to talk about this important topic.
Yes.
Of course, I'll leave with the fact that if anybody needs any support, they are more than welcome to call Usawa Wellness Services at 210-951-3479. Or I will put the email that they can communicate with our front desk within the comments. And we will see you all next time. I hope everyone finishes off their week strong and has a great weekend.
Yeah, and do some self-care.
Thank you, ladies.
Self-care.
Yes, self-care.
Bye.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye. Bye.